Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to the minigame podcast, and we're going to jump into the news fairly quickly here in just a minute or two. Today is barely March 21st, and through a combination of me waking up late and then letting my macros try to catch up because they haven't run correctly in so long that there's just been a major delay in me starting. Also, on top of that, I am also trying to target somewhere closer to 7 in the evening, so there is even less of a margin for error there, certainly, to even make Friday, March 21st. Like, we are just about to run into it. So I'm just going to scroll down on the 24-hour concurrent peak chart basically once, and then we're going to move into the rest of the charts, making a lot of experiments and twists here. As far as the catch up, I finished playing the Blackwell Legacy a second time through with two different commentaries. One that feels like it was made right as the game was first released, and one that was made 5 years later. And I definitely dislike the 5 years later commentary less. There's a better way to say that. I like the 5 years later commentary more than the almost instant commentary. But both commentaries are frankly pretentious, and the game developer is, I think, a little bit diluted would probably be the nicest way to do it. Diluted in thinking that he made really more of a masterpiece point and click with the Blackwell Legacy than he really did, and diluted that he's actually even at a level where you would consider him one of the greats of making point and click adventures. Maybe there is a lot of improvement over the 4 other Blackwell games, but they were released fairly close to each other, so you would have to have made massive improvement. This looks like this might be new. Very quickly. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the Blackwell series is going to be very mid, something you would want to play once after you've done all the greats. I also think that there's probably a separation between a lot of point-and-click adventures that are serious in their nature, they're murder mysteries, that they may have supernatural elements that may be darker, and then there is Monkey Island, and then there's Indiana Jones and Fate of Atlantis, and just all of the silly ones that I grew up with and love, and I think those are the games that most people really think about and when they think point and click. There was a tone set with Maniac Mansion in particular in the silliness aspects there. And it may very well come down to the Sierra King's Quest fans perhaps wanting something slightly different, and then the Black Mirror Blackwell Legacy fans, I don't even know what would be the best example to use there, wanting something different. So there might really be 3 niche sub-fandoms within one fandom, which certainly would explain why point-and-click adventures really didn't pass through it. They didn't stay around as well as they probably should have. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend going through the commentary right after playing the game for the first time. It makes a lot more sense to simply have played the next game in this series, which is Blackwell Unbound, I believe. Yeah, they're named poorly and not numbered, and certainly at any point he could have changed the names to improve that. One of the things about the commentary also for the Blackwell Legacy is that he mentions another game he made called the Shiva a lot in the commentary, so if that was the case, he probably should have warned at the very first bit of commentary that you should probably play the Shiva first, but then you would have had to have bought the Shiva. And I do have it, I just had no idea that it was even made by the same person. And it's not like it's storyline connected, as far as I can tell, to the Blackwell series. And then the only other thing I'm doing is I'm still watching Psych. Saw the ending of the season of Severance. Really very little happened over this season as far as Severance goes, in my opinion. It may have been a somewhat fun experience the first time through, but if you were to really write a report on it, the big revelation at the end of the first season only gets really readdressed and touched upon at the finale of the second season. And so pretty much all of the episodes in between have to be about something different than what you mostly would have been there and interested in. And so it does kind of feel like the rest of the season is mostly filler, except for perhaps some aspects of getting rid of one actor who I don't know if he is actually going to show up in the next season or not. And the little girl secretary replacement character, nothing really came about from that, other than it gives you a slight indication of what the world is like outside, which seems to be a corporatocracy, or approaching a soon to be a corporatocracy. The Egan's aspect really has not revealed much of anything. Mr. Milchick's character developed just a little bit, and that's about it. Meanwhile, in the season finale, they get rid of one character. They also introduce two other characters that we don't really get much from, as far as an understanding of what's going on there. And there is no way they're ever going to really explain all the weirdness on the Severance floor, other than it's just weirdness for weirdness' sake. I do certainly, and I'm going to wrap up quickly here because I want to actually jump into video game news and talk about video game news. I really wonder who is really doing all the writing and who is introducing all the ideas, because they say Ben Stiller is the executive producer, and he's got that credit, but Ben Stiller is a nepo baby. Like, he has almost certainly never actually worked in an office in his life. If he did, it was probably for less than 6 months. So the idea of this is a exaggerated parody of what Office is ridiculous. Ben Stiller is Jerry Stiller's son, as I understand it. I might be completely wrong about that, but I'm gonna stick with that guess. So somebody else has to be bringing a lot of those ideas, and you can't just like watch the British Office or the American version of The Office and get those ideas either. So somebody had to have actually worked in an office that had this level of ridiculousness, or a smaller version of that. And I definitely have seen, I've worked in some offices and seen things like the Severance floor to smaller extents, where companies spout off nonsense and slogans and frankly just try to create a dogmatic feeling, a religious feeling amongst the employees, and all the employees don't really buy into it, and it's just like, who in the world thinks that there's somebody who lacks so much cynicism, that doesn't even have a drop of cynicism, would fall for that? But it gets really unbelievable in season 2 in particular, just to see all of the religiosity outside of the severed floor. Because it's almost believable that if you had these baby personalities that have only existed for a few hours, that you could instill in them some kind of completely different reality. But to see employees at Lumen who aren't on the 7th floor, it's just about the same nonsense. Implies that Lumen has done this same kind of concept and this same kind of stuff possibly for decades, and has actually succeeded in convincing people. You would expect that if any corporation tried to do this, I mean, really, if Apple is probably the best example of that, where Apple has succeeded in creating a religiosity in its fanboys, the Apple fanboys. And even then, you see a major amount of pushback and a major amount of people who don't buy into that level. And yeah, if Apple at some point was approaching a corporatocracy, one would hope that there would be enough riots in the streets to prevent that from happening, or that there would at least be enough competition from somebody else to prevent something like that from happening. Whereas Lumen doesn't even seem to have any competitors. Seems like it's a monopoly. And it seems like it potentially has even shop towns. I mean, yeah. Is that what they're called? Corporate towns? Like, just the corporation running the government, running the cities. Which was a failed experiment in the United States that the United States is also potentially trying to bring back. But I don't want to get into politics. The only other thing I watched was Psych Season 7. Season 7 increasingly has parodies. Like, the video footage looks a lot better now. They switched to digital. It looks like they also switched to a different production company and are doing it as a USA original in-house now on Season 7. But yeah, almost every episode is either a parody of a movie or it is a relationship focused episode, and it's just more relationship. Gus has a girlfriend. The main protagonist, I forget his name, has Jules as a girlfriend, or at least he did until the latest episode where Jules finds out that he's not really psychic and then is needing space. They moved in too quick together. Certainly they moved just way too fast to didn't break them up again. So it's like they wanted them to have a near marriage, then a breakup all in one season, which is too ambitious. Meanwhile, they throw Lassiter in having a relationship and getting married into the mix too. So they're very much breaking the status quo as far as the grouping of people, which breaks the status quo of doing regular episodes, just murder mysteries of the week. Although, in fairness, by the time you've gotten to Season 7, you've hit your 100 episodes more than likely for syndication, and breaking the status quo is what I imagine a lot of people in the production team would want to do. Of course, you don't get to that supernatural 15 seasons by really breaking the status quo too much. There's a pattern certainly there with a supernatural episode, in that it is often a monster of a week episode with a through line season to season of one major bad guy. Yeah, and yeah, I think that's all I did. So that is as much warm up as I'm going to allow myself today, and by necessity we're just going to do an experiment of having minimal warm up and going to the video game news. Now, something weird has happened here, where in Firefox now it is asking me to whether I want to leave the page or not. I don't know if I clicked something somewhere or what, but a lot of times now that this is, I think, part of a JavaScript on unload prompt, but it seems like it's just happening to a lot of pages. So yeah, the Steam hardware survey has not been updated since February as far as I can tell, but I have added this as another page to have open every time we're going to just look at it very quickly and then move on. Yeah, I guess February makes sense since we're in March. And as part of the accountability warm up, it's also worth mentioning that, yeah, I still haven't finished the taxes I need to do, which I still have time, but I need to be very careful to get that done. As I'm decluttering and cleaning my house, there's still just a massive amount of papers everywhere, and going through all of that, it is exacerbating doing taxes. And certainly when you're doing taxes this year, there is thoughts of what the next year will be like. Of course, deal with what you can deal with at the moment. Don't worry about things in the future. I'm also gonna see if there's a way to venture in Math Island. Carmen Sandiego Adventures in Math, the Island of Diamonds. Never heard of it. Apparently it was a Wii game. I never heard that Carmen Sandiego ever got into math. It would make some sense. A game like that would be more universal and still relevant in the future. Math doesn't change that much. But yeah, I'm gonna look for a way to potentially type up the 1040 forms, the tax forms, and print out the responses. I don't trust my handwriting particularly well, and so for these kinds of official forms, I think it would be nicer to type them up. In the old days, you might have a typewriter for that sort of thing. It is now particularly pointless to do something like that, have a typewriter. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's perhaps some dislike amongst particularly IRS if you do type up the things. Of course you can file it digitally, so they probably wouldn't care. As long as you actually sign your name and don't type the signature, that would be the one thing that they'd probably have a problem with. So the good news on this pop-up as far as do you want to leave the page is I do know of a way that sounds like it will fix that. So I will implement that change. I already did some tweaks to try and make tabs stay awake longer and not unload into virtual memory instead of RAM or into the swap space, or just suspend completely, which is what it's. Most browsers do that, and most people who are browsing the pages do that. They don't mind if you haven't been to a page in 5 minutes that you would click on the tab and then wait a second or two for it to reload. But for my macros, that needs to really happen. If I'm going to cover the Shiva, I should probably cover the graveyard too. That's a really short thing. But I'm not sure that there actually is more than even 5 minutes worth of content in the graveyard. But whatever. It's probably worth doing. Still. Yeah, I'm still trying to get the YouTube shorts scheduled and still uploading pre-recorded footage, but I still have not gotten to the point where I'm actually scheduling any of the pre-recorded footage. So, yeah. I'm playing games, but mostly I'm playing games for my own entertainment at the moment. And then, yeah, I question whether I will just naturally have a get 1,000 subscribers and then all of a sudden put out all the pre-recorded footage at some point after that point and then start losing subscribers. But I mean, what can you really do about that? Like, if that's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. And there's just it's insane as a content creator that there really is even the slightest impulse to put out less content, and yet there very much is a situation there where it feels like less content might be better for many content creators, particularly for my channel. But it would have to be better content if it was less content, which, yeah. 10 years later, after starting my YouTube channel, 10 plus years later, I still am 100% in the mindset that I do not want to become a video editor. How did we only get to March 20th here? I don't understand that. But yeah, I don't want to be a video editor. I don't want to play a 60-hour game and then try to cut that footage down into a 20-minute scripted review because I just have the gift of gab, which is perhaps a curse as much as a gift, and I talk a lot more, and there is no great points where I'm making just an excellent point in one episode and then the rest of the points are absolutely pointless and should be edited and left on the cutting room floor. I may be fairly repetitive episode to episode in a long play, saying the same things, but even in that, that's probably useful information if you're playing a 60-hour game and 5 times throughout those 60 hours I'm saying here's a section that's done poorly because of this reason, and then here's another section that's done poorly for the same reason, or here's a gameplay mechanic that once again is irritating me because it's just not appropriate for that specific game, or it's not polished well in general. But yeah, particularly in the Blackwell Legacy, there is an element here of it being a point-and-click adventure game, really in name only, and really it is more of just trying to be a linear narrative experience, more like a visual novel that has crammed in a minimal amount of item interactions and a few more dialogue puzzles. And yeah, a lot of its item interactions are ideas and clues, so you have to go to the notebook, which is a different interface, and mix 2 discussion topics together to create a new discussion topic. And the notebook interface, where you can mix and match discussion topics, looks exactly the same as the discussion interface, but in the discussion interface, which you can only bring up when you're talking to somebody, you can't mix and match topics. So yeah, it feels like those 2 interfaces should become one. The biggest problem I would say about the Blackwell Legacy, though, is that the creator has the characters in his head. And they're like living, breathing characters with a lot of backstory. And what actually gets shown in Blackwell Legacy as far as the game goes is way less than that. And so you have these extremely shallow, empty characters. That being said, I would still say the Blackwell Legacy is better than Kathy Rain, in that here, Kathy Rain, it says I spent 35 hours in it. That's not really accurate, but I probably did spend about 12 hours in it actually playing, and the first 3 had no sign of supernatural elements at all, where you get into the supernatural elements way quicker. It's at most maybe an hour before you get to supernatural elements in Blackwell Legacy. And yeah, I have nothing but disappointment as far as the Lego Builder's Journey, so I'm not even gonna bother to talk about that. Playing it on Steam the first time through was to only 10 hours at most, and the Steam does have achievements, darn it. So yeah, to get all of the achievements on that game, I'm gonna probably try and cheat some way using save files from running it with the ScumVM engine, which is what I did to play it the second time with the commentary. And one of the achievements is based around the aspect of listening to both of the commentaries. But yeah, even 10 hours here is probably a little longer than it actually takes to play the game. There is certainly a thought, though, of having point-and-click adventure games that are a little bit shorter and smaller and cheaper. But I don't think that inherently solves the lack of demand for point-and-click adventures in particular. There was just no more gimmicks, really, that add to point-and-clicks that anybody found, and there's just seemingly not any room for any more gimmicks, which would have helped quite a bit if there was room. So the spring sale is over at this point, so we're back to whatever the slightly newer, slightly different front page of Steam is. It'll look a lot like what the front page looked like before the spring sale, but there will be more than likely at least one little tweak here or there, changing something, because that tends to be exactly what they do. Although they could have changed nothing, that's certainly a possibility. I'm still a little peeved that with Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, they didn't make a supplemental point-and-click Indiana Jones game. They certainly could have gotten somebody like Double Fine inside of Microsoft to make something like that, even if it was only a couple hours. It's just, hey, here's a throwback way of promoting the Great Circle. And I guess they still could do something like that. They could release it as far as a advertisement a year later. Bleach Rebirth of Souls is getting mixed reviews, so seems like no fun to be found there. But yeah, these individual sales are not going to be things that I'm likely going to want to engage in, but you might find it a decent price. Like getting Kingdom Hearts games 40% off might be about as good as you're ever going to get, particularly for Square Enix. Getting the Final Fantasy games discounted, even 35% off, might be your best bet for newer games. It is more variety here than I really expected. I didn't really know Square Enix published Nier Automata. Of course, it's hard to justify even thinking about buying any more games when the spring sale just happened. So you're really shooting yourself in the foot, whoever is the next publisher to have a publisher sale after a bigger sale. And spring sale's not even that big. It might be a case that these Square Enix games were not on sale during the spring sale. Balan Wonderworld is mixed. I'm surprised it's even mixed. From what I had heard, it was awful, but I don't know, maybe the PC version of it is somewhat more doable. And I thought Chrono Cross was well received in general, so maybe there's something with the PC versions of it. Yeah, there's quite a lot of variety here. And if you're going to go down that Dragon Quest route, I think you probably would want to stick with just the mainline ones, like this. These like pixeled remastered ones, I guess, are being received very positively. There is a real feeling, though, at this point that if you were gonna get a kid into the Final Fantasy series, they might spend their entire childhood playing Final Fantasy games alone. There's so many and they're so long. A lot of promotion here down in the bottom for Life is Strange. And weirder games. And then we're getting some repetition as far as the games being promoted. And you can see a lot of these games I already own. I do question, though, if all of these actually are by Square Enix, or if whether this publisher sale itself is expanding to promote other things. Secrets of Mana mixed reviewed also. It's kind of easy also for me to say no to a game if it is rated negatively, or even mixed if it's a JRPG in particular, because I already have that trepidation of not really wanting to play Voices of the Cards of Forsaken Maiden, Voices of the Cards Island, Dragon Roars. Interesting. 2 games. This one's newer. This one's older. This one's newer. But yeah, I have a high trepidation as far as playing long-running JRPGs or RPGs in general, so it would definitely benefit me to skip on many of them, since also it's not really even a genre I want to stick that to. I'll play an occasional one, but I don't want to become known for playing JRPGs or RPGs. I almost wonder if we're at a point now where every publisher sale and every sale is required to have a Steam Deck section, because this does kind of feel almost like an afterthought. DF Retro put out a video in perhaps the 5 minutes I was awake today, before now, talking about how the AAA games that are coming out today and nowadays are in it's a shame it's a mixed. Yeah, it's just not really a good reason to put that on the even fall list. Yeah. DF Retro was talking about how the Steam Deck is struggling to run brand new AAA games, things that would require a 5080 NVIDIA RTX graphics card. And yeah, there is an element to that, certainly. The Steam Deck is like a year older, so its technology is probably going to wear through a little bit quicker than a desktop computer, where desktop computers can be overpowered and can be upgraded, whereas the Steam Deck is a handheld device that's going to be like a gaming laptop. And there's always been this case where buying a gaming laptop is going to come with some compromises, and you're going to more quickly end up buying a new gaming laptop than you would buying a gaming PC. And frankly, you're going to pay about the same amount for a gaming laptop as a gaming PC, and probably get more with a gaming PC. So it was very hard to justify ever getting a gaming laptop for anybody who just didn't absolutely want that portability. But yeah, even if a new Steam Deck came out and it had a new Strix Halo setup, the question would really come down to how many games that really fixes as far as compatibility. If you throw in a Zen 3 or 4 CPU, you'd still be behind a Zen 5 CPU, which would be the newest technology. If you have RDNA 3 graphics CPU chips instead of RDNA 2, you're still, I think, one generation behind at that. So really, you have to, even if you had a Zen 5 and RDNA 4.5, which is I think really what they've got now, that newer technology will maybe lead to more optimized experiences, but it still would only help a handful of AAA games. And there's been so few AAA games released in the past 2 years that you're really requiring overpowering it quite a bit. If you went from 4 core to 8 core, sure, that would, on the CPU size, help with some games, but it would probably kill your battery. If you went to 16 RDNA 4 CUDA units, that would improve. If you went up a generation on either of these, the processing speed will go up, but then the wattage will go up. You really aren't even going to improve on the RAM. Like low profile DDR5 at 550 megathreads, I mean, you can get really expensive RAM that I think goes up to 8,000 megathreads per second. I think that's what AMT stands for. But yeah, again, that'll use a lot more power. You also, with any improvement, would have to just improve the amount of size of storage space for these giant AAA games. Yeah. So I think DF Retro on that video is probably doing a bit of a disservice. Here we can see none are refurbed in stock at the moment, because it really is implying a snobbish thought pattern that is not realistic to expect or want with the Steam Deck. Steam Deck is still incredibly powerful enough to play games from 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and older. And if that is the games you are going to be playing, which is probably what you're going to do, is you're going to be looking for more of the portable, more of the lightweight games to play on your Steam Deck as your secondary screen, I guess, away from playing on a cell phone. Yeah. And I imagine we'll have DF Retro say almost the exact same thing with the brand new Switch 2. And maybe the Switch 2 will come out and it will have more powerful hardware than the Steam Deck, and then maybe that would push Valve to thinking about making a Steam Deck 2. But the price will be a lot, and that is even before you start talking about tariffs. Yeah. Here we have a great chart that knows I've put the top played Steam Deck games right after seeing if the Steam Deck things are in stock. I probably should move that around, but I won't get around to doing that for a while. But yeah, as far as the top games ranked being played on the Steam Deck, you have Balatro, which is not going to be that demanding. Stardew Valley, which is not going to be that demanding. Baldur's Gate, fairly demanding though, and still playable. Elden Ring, fairly demanding. Cyberpunk 2077, fairly demanding. Binding of Isaac Rebirth, not demanding really. Still one of the best games ever, although not played by that many people. Red Dead Redemption 2 is not a completely brand new game, but it's still fairly demanding. Elder Scrolls is an incredibly old game. Still might be a little demanding for a Steam Deck, but not likely causing problems. Hogwarts Legacy, Hades, Marvel Rivals, playing perfectly fine as far as it seems, although maybe not perfectly fine, because you can see that a couple of these games do say they have some Steam Deck verified issues, and that, yeah, this game Repo is becoming more and more of a thing. Split Fiction is being played. Witcher 3 is slightly older but fairly demanding. Fallout 4, slightly older. So it isn't really a case that the Steam Deck is only for 2D graphics, simplistic games. There's plenty of games. This Hello Kitty game is doing pretty well too. Assassin's Creed Shadows being played on the Steam Deck as a new game this week. So there's a brand new game, maybe not what you would really call AAA. It technically is probably AAA, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little less ambitious than the other Assassin's Creed games. Once the Switch 2 really comes out and people start looking at it, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a lot of argument being made to just get a Steam Deck instead of a Switch 2. That if the Steam Deck is more powerful, and if the Switch 2 is more expensive, but just about the same price, which, yeah, if you don't care about Nintendo games, you definitely shouldn't get a Switch 2. It's just going to really come down to those Nintendo exclusives. And it might, for a percentage of players, come down to just how easy is it going to be to emulate and steal Nintendo exclusives on day one and play them on PC. Because, yeah, we may very well be at that point where brand new releases of Switch 2 games might be playable on a Steam Deck through emulation just fine. Fallout 76 says it's new, but I think it's just got a new update, or it's new to the chart. Which I wonder if things can fall off the chart and then come back to the chart and be labeled as new. But yeah, it would be a very different story if I scroll down this list and only saw things like Vampire Survivors or very simplistic 2D animation games. But you get a very decent combination of 3D games being played on the Steam Deck. The big part of that probably is also an indication that a lot of people just don't care as much about graphics as the game developers themselves care about graphics. And are more than willing to play it at a awkward resolution of 1280 by 800, which is what the Steam Deck has, at probably lower frame rates and probably lower video settings. Particularly if you have a game like Lego Builders, which I have half a mind to install that on my Steam Deck and just see what that looks like in those incredibly dark middle puzzles, to see if maybe the OLED screen makes that look any better. But for just a regular LCD backlit TV screen, which is what I was looking at it, I could not even see most of the levels. It was in the ray tracing elements that made the first couple of levels, when they were bright and outside in outside scenes, looked really good, and then the vast majority of the game is underground and dark, dim scenes. So it felt very, very bait and switchy as far as what you were expecting to have. Anyways, let's go through Video Games Chronicle news. I do believe Video Games Chronicle in particular this was one of the parts of the macro that didn't really work, but I am making small bits of progress to get it to actually work. And I'm thinking at some point I'm going to have to just not allow the macro to close any tabs ever, because there's just too high of a chance of it closing the wrong tabs. Sega apparently warns that Japanese players who bought fraudulent in-game currency have been convicted. The publisher claims that people selling and buying in-game currency outside of its apps could be arrested. So have they been convicted, or is this saying could have been? Could be arrested. Well, they said they could be arrested, citing a recent example. So increasingly, in a fairly different way, it feels like video game companies are getting the Japanese government to work for them. And it's harder to say that I feel like Japan is going to become a corporatocracy, but there's just this danger that every country in the world is going to eventually become a corporatocracy. Money just has too much influence, and while Japan is imperial, ceremonially imperial, it's not really politically imperial. So you don't have an emperor of Japan that could put down heavy taxes on corporations like Sega to make sure they don't have too much influence, or by his word alone break up Sega if it became too strong. And Sega is not even a great example. More than likely you would do that with Nintendo first, as too big and too powerful. But yeah, there's very little desire amongst the rich and influential for the political people to go against the rich and influential. Which is probably a long way of saying I don't feel like this is something that you should be thrown in jail for or convicted for. Maybe they weren't thrown in jail, but generally if you're arrested, you're thrown in jail for a brief time. But this definitely seems like at most a civil crime, and at least not a crime at all, in that there seems like there are third-party sellers who, for one reason or another, are creating some kind of different marketplace and some kind of different competition to the monopoly of how currency is gained in Sega games. Now, one would wonder if maybe there was some more fraud involved in how that third-party currency came about. I'm read all of this, though. This is actually a fairly long article. I'm trying to rush here. Yeah, I definitely need to fix this prompt because it's going to come up everywhere. Housemarque CEO reveals a pivotal role of the Sony acquisition enabling Saros' development. You couldn't have made such investments as an independent studio, says Ilari Kuintinen. That's a weird name. We don't know anything about Saros really, other than we saw this trailer, and in the trailer, if you dive deep, it seems to hint like it's going to potentially play something like Returnal. And so this is barely an article, or barely a headline at least, that interests me, and feels like it is just they found a way to put an advertisement to remind people that Saros was announced. Vintage specialist Retro Games is working on a full-sized Amiga 1200 replica, but says it's been delayed by legal disputes. The company previously released a mini Amigo at 500, but wants to make a full-size model with a working keyboard. And yeah, I would have to assume that maybe they don't have the license around that. This is something that probably appeals a lot more to the UK audience of Video Games Chronicles than Westerners in the United States, who probably never saw an Amiga 1200. And all of these like first generation video game quote-unquote consoles often are just keyboards and things like this. You'd just plug it into a TV, or maybe you'd have to plug it into a monitor, and you would be doing a lot of text-based games or extremely slow-moving, very simplistic visual graphics. And honestly, if you're gonna try and play any Amiga 1200 games, you're gonna have to have nostalgia around them, and probably still at that point don't need this level of nostalgia and should just emulate them. If I had more time, I might look up just a list of all the games for the Amiga 1200, but it's going to be a list of very few games, and they're going to be things like Snake or something. They're going to be, the names of the games are going to be called something simplistic like that: Snake, Castle, Pong. You know, there's not going to be anything that's relevant today. A new unofficial WWE 2K25 website is launched, which makes it easier to find created wrestlers. It's called WWE 2K Tools. Features a database designed to make finding CAWs much quicker. I don't know what the A stands for, but I'd assume it's custom animated wrestling something. Which, yeah, perhaps that highlights for someone like me on the outside looking in where the real fun is being made around the wrestling games, is that you just have a lot of dedicated people making custom wrestlers and not really paying as much attention to the classic wrestling skins, which have been released year after year and get updated a little bit every year. But at this point, a lot of wrestling fans may be tired of playing as Triple H for the 15th time. And I imagine the single player experience, if you go through the single player experience, also forces players to play as characters like Triple H or The Rock over and over again. I wouldn't be surprised if the video games do recreations of things like the Hell in the Cell match, and it is just nowhere as entertaining as actually watching the real footage of the Hell in the Cell match. So we've got this white box here, and before I read the headline, that did remind me, something went weird with my Ecobee thermostat. They updated the software, and now the comfort settings have more settings as far as controlling whether the fan comes on or not. There's a fan in a whole house air conditioning unit that will just circulate air that can be controlled separately from either the heater unit that would heat up the air and work with the fan, or the compressor cooler unit coils which would work with the fan to blow colder air around. Or yeah, I'd say more accurately, it's not blowing colder air around as much as it is sucking in hot air from your house intake and cooling it down. But yeah, because those settings are there in the comfort settings now instead of just universal for the whole system, some of my comfort settings were turning on the fan to just always be on, and so I was just getting a lot of noise that I could hear. Hopefully my microphone didn't pick it up, and I was getting really cold too, because yeah, while it is just circulating the air and actually technically might be heating the air a little bit just because the fan creates heat, the act of air going across a human skin feels colder because it dries out and evaporates the sweat on your skin and the oil on your skin, making you feel cooler and colder, tricking your brain. Same reason why ceiling fans work when humans are in the room and don't work when humans aren't in the room, so that's why you should turn them off when you leave a room. Save electricity. But yeah, it is weird though in the Ecobee setup, again this has nothing to do with video games, that the options are only auto and on. You don't have an option for a comfort setting where you can turn it off, which a couple of my comfort settings are designed to be triggered when it is like raining and snowing, and so in those cases you would want the fans off no matter what. Just let the house get a little stuffy. If it is actively raining or snowing, nobody is going to complain at that point, or at least I don't think anybody would complain. So it's still weirdly not giving you a lot of control, and when it is an auto mode, there's still an overall setting that says I want the fans to run at least 5 minutes to an hour every hour, which in my experiments for my house, 15 minutes at minimum every hour seems to be about right. That way you're just circulating air and sucking out dust into the dust filters. Alright, so yeah, if you're experiencing the same issue, or if all of a sudden your fans are starting to stay on all the time, I'd say go check out the comfort settings on the Ecobee. I have an older Ecobee thermostat at this point though, so it may be unique to that model. Meanwhile, if I'm going to talk about smart home tech, I should also mention that SwitchBot has expanded its commitment in a press release to Home Assistant, which yeah, that probably will be nice. It probably is the only way SwitchBot devices would integrate with any other smart homes very well. I have a SwitchBot mop, and in those cases I imagine most of the settings are still, even if it is integrated with Home Assistant, are going to be difficult to use outside of the official app, which yeah, you're really just going to need that official app anyways to probably update the firmware and things like that on the mop. So let's talk about this headline. Ken Kutaragi has a Nintendo PlayStation in his closet. It's emerged. The PlayStation co-creator still owns one of the prototype type consoles. Okay, it looks like one of the buttons broke off, and it looks like these buttons in particular were attached very much in a haphazard way as a prototype. You can see that there's a bigger gap here at the bottom and barely any gap at the top, a big gap here, a smaller, much smaller gap here, broken off buttons, gaps on the sides. This looks like an off-the-shelf screen that maybe even has a sticker around it to make it fit. And notice that nowhere on this image is Nintendo even shown. So, yeah. Yeah. This is a nice, I guess, bit of history of a prototype that didn't go anywhere. The big breakup between Nintendo and Sony led to Sony releasing the PS1 with a disk drive and no cartridge player, and Nintendo stabbed them in the back as far as the story seems to go, and it all, I think, came down to Nintendo feeling disrespected by Sony or something like that. It would be a fascinating story, but it is an old story, not worth rehashing over and over again. I doubt Ken Kutaragi is going to sell this anytime soon, or put it in a museum where it more than likely belongs. It would probably be wise to have something like this encased in at least acrylic, if not glass, cases, just to try and protect it. But yeah, it's kind of hard to say that is in modern times really relevant, just rehashing what didn't happen. The next free Epic Games Store title is available now, but Epic keeps next week a mystery. Looks like it's Jurassic World Evolution 2. Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 is now available for the Xbox and PS5. The Seattle Mariners will wear Nintendo and Switch logos on their jerseys this season. The MLB team wears its partnership with Nintendo on its sleeve, literally. Interesting. So that may very well speak to a certain love of baseball amongst the new Nintendo of Japan CEO. Yeah. Or maybe a love of baseball by Doug Bowser, Nintendo of America, too. Baseball is still pretty popular in Japan, and I think very quickly we're going to start to see baseball being way more popular in Japan as it's losing its fandom in the West, in the United States. Redmond, Washington, where Nintendo of America is really just kind of a subsidiary, or it's really close to Seattle, Washington. So the Seattle Mariners are right in the backyard of Nintendo of America. I'm not sure there's much more story to be said there, is that they're just doing advertisement. I don't recall this ever happening before, though, or at least being reported on. So it does definitely show that there's new leadership, either at Nintendo of Japan or Nintendo of America, or both, that are differently prioritizing it. Or this might also be a story that could be interpreted as Nintendo is just looking for different ways to advertise itself, that they just don't want to continuously put out money to put TV ads or streaming ads out. It is a little surprising when you watch like Prime Video that you get the same ads over and over again, and it isn't usually targeted to me in any way. Like it's not sending any Nintendo video game ads out, or video game ads in general. which is a little surprising. Yeah. I'll leave it at that. Let's see. Devil May Cry, Dragon's Dogma director, says his new studio is working on a AAA action game. Hideaki Itsuno has joined Lightspeed Japan Studio late last year. Okay. Again, a lot of these headlines don't seem to imply too much. There clearly is a lot more text here if I had time to actually read the articles, but them making a AAA action game definitely feels like it's in their wheelhouse. It would be much more surprising if they told me they were making a Vampire Survivors clone or point and click adventure or a visual novel. That would feel extremely weird considering the pedigree of this one employee alone of the new company. So maybe that means they have some funding somewhere too, some support that's going to allow it to be a AAA action game to the modern scale that requires more effort, more money, not effort. Well, both actually. Apparently, 2/3 of the total PC playtime last year was on games that are at least 6 years old, a report says. Yeah, that probably also highlights how a lot of PC gaming is still just kind of from a heyday of, I don't know if 6 years is really the right time frame, but at the very least the last 2 years have been awful, and the couple of years before that really weren't great either. So 6 years might be exactly where it is at. It's not like there hasn't been anything that's come out, and perhaps there is a pandemic element to this too, in that if you were stuck at home in the COVID pandemic, maybe you would have picked up a game that was at least 6 years old, and you may still very well be playing that same game over and over again. There's a danger here though that it's going to be like the numbers are incredibly skewed for like Counter-Strike 2, because there's more than likely a huge amount of bots playing Counter-Strike 2 and things like that. So yeah, immediately they mentioned Counter-Strike True and Global Offensive as what it was called before. A lot of bots there. And then yeah, there's probably more legitimate numbers from things like Fortnite too. But there have been new games also. Let's see, Call of Duty Black Ops 6, NBA 2K25, and EA FC 25 accounted for roughly half of the total playtime spent in 2024 releases on console. So nearly a quarter of all console players, according to this report, are very much in what I would call the gamer bros demographic, playing these annualized games, these sports games, these 3 games that may be the only 3 games those console players even bought. Yeah, and I will say the phrase again, gaming is a big tent, and to be called a gamer really means almost nothing, because there's a wide variety of different types of gamers out there. People who play puzzle games or point and click adventures or visual novels, or the gamer bros who are playing Call of Duty, and those groups of people tend not to really overlap as much, and they tend not to really interact as much. Speaking of not interacting as much, I am still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, but they still have a real problem in that they like to take like at least 5 days of a break in between one expansion and the other, which gives you a little bit of time to catch up, but it also just gives you no new content to really play with. So there are no events happening right now. I'm just working on getting all the daily challenge, the solo challenges done. But yeah, it definitely is not a great experience. And it feels like, I know that there's going to be an article about their next release, and it is only going to be maybe a week, but it feels like in this week's downtime that there should be some bonuses handed out to help people catch up and get more cards. And they have like chancy events to get promo cards that are showing up as far as the Wonder Picks, but that's about it. There's nothing else going on, which, yeah, very easily I could see players getting bored in that these 1 week downturns and not moving and not playing and then never coming back to it, which, yeah, that's how you kill your game in the long run. Now, I'm going to apologize for this, but I'm going to take a brief break before we move on into the news, even though we are going to go late into the night. It'll be surprising if this stream going so late in the night turns into a whole bunch of views, but I doubt it. We'll see. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. That one was a really short break, which hopefully that's the only break I will need for today, but there's no telling. So Phil Spencer says more movies and TV shows based on Xbox games are on the way. Xbox is learning with each production it works on, Phil Spencer says, which I guess is a very basic statement that everybody could say, and hopefully everybody could say, and that you're learning with every project. Is this from the Halo TV series here? I don't even know, because I'd have to kind of assume, because as far as I know, there hasn't been a female power armored character in any of the Halo games. But yeah, from what I heard, the Halo TV series wasn't very interested in actually telling anything that felt like a Halo series, which, in fairness, I'm not sure what a Halo series should feel like, even. Like, in a lot of ways, I kind of feel like a portion of a Halo TV series should be more like a Dude Perfect YouTube video, where there's just a whole bunch of running and gunning tricks being shown off. So it would be, well, that's probably a terrible comparison, since that's not what Dude Perfect does at all. But yeah, I would think it would be a high action show that you would just see a lot of shooting and things like that going on. A lot of running and gunning. Then here we have a trailer for the Minecraft movie, which I'm not even willing to entertain spending any more time watching any of the trailers for the Minecraft movie or anything like that. It'll be interesting to see what the reviews are for it, but I can pretty well guess that most reviewers are already polishing their pitchforks to tear the new one and say it's an awful movie. Which, if the trailers are awful, often trailers are the exact opposite of what the movie is, because the trailers are made by a completely different group of people. So maybe we'll find out that the Minecraft movie is just acceptable, mediocre, and then the reviews might feel a little bit more positive in contrast to the trailer. I have no belief that the Minecraft movie is actually going to be good. The other issue certainly around the idea of Xbox having more movies and TV shows, though, implies that there's a lot of series that Microsoft owns. Even though Microsoft owns a lot, there's not a lot of series there that I think convert to TV or movies particularly well. You'd really have to think about the entirety of all the Activision Blizzard merger and what has been added there, because there'll be a chunk of games there that kind of makes sense. But inherently, you have Call of Duty Stories, which I don't think a Call of Duty TV series or movie does too much new. And then you have World of Warcraft and Warcraft based stories, which more than likely would feel like animated TV shows for kids if you were going to do something like that. You have Overwatch TV or movies, which you could do something there, but again, that would feel like an animated movie that you would want to do. And I don't think Microsoft and Xbox wants to really make kid-friendly content. I think they want to do Last of Us style live action content. Diablo, I mean, you could maybe try and do a Diablo live action TV series in the same way that Netflix had that Witcher TV series. It still would probably be somewhat niche. You do have some narrative there that kind of makes some sense. So as far as the Activision Blizzard merger goes, I think Diablo is the one and probably the only one to really go with as far as a narrative line. Then if you think about all the Double Fine games, there's kind of nothing. If you think about the Obsidian games and the ZeniMax games, there's not a lot there. You do have the Elder Scrolls series, and there are role-playing experiences from Elder Scrolls, but there isn't a canonical experience for a story in the Elder Scrolls. So I could see them experimenting with an Elder Scrolls TV series, but it would just feel like a generic fantasy show that would have very little connection to Elder Scrolls. You could do Prey as a movie, perhaps the new Prey game, and maybe they've tried Doom movies multiple times, but I'm sure they'll try again. And the Fallout TV series is again one that has somehow magically succeeded. So there would be an argument, since Fallout succeeded, to try and do an Elder Scrolls TV series in the exact same way that the Fallout TV series was done. But I imagine you only have one group of producers and showrunners who can run the Fallout TV series, and so I don't think them being overbooked and overworked to make an Elder Scrolls series would make a lot of sense. Yeah. And then when I try to think of other games that Microsoft might have, it really isn't much. So, yeah. Yeah. And they are very well split here in kids movies with the Minecraft movies, which Microsoft owns Minecraft, come to think of it, and Fallout TV series. So this is almost certainly really just a statement as part of the promotion of the Minecraft movie, which I would lay my bets down on the table to suspect that the Minecraft movie is just going to fail miserably, and then Microsoft will have an easy excuse to not try too hard with any of their other properties. And with perhaps the failure of the Minecraft movie, they can blame any potential future failures of Minecraft in contrasted to the Notch creator of Minecraft and his new company making a new game, and that coming out and being a major success, which probably will be. I bet a lot of Minecraft YouTubers will try Notch's new game if it's even somewhat decently good. A lot of Minecraft streamers might move over to that new game, which will bring the general gaming audience to be more interested in playing that new game. Remember, Minecraft streamers at this point have probably been playing Minecraft for at least 8 years, so they're probably very happy to move on to something else if they can, but it's all going to depend on whether they get the same amount of views or not. Moving on, 4 classic Koei SNES strategy games are coming to Switch Online. Nobunaga's Ambition, Romance of the Three Kingdoms 4 are among this week's new additions. Which, yeah, that's some old games that aren't going to be particularly relevant. And I guess what we're seeing is that there are at least a few Super NES games that can come to Switch Online still. They haven't done the full collection there. Maybe they just signed a licensing agreement with Koei Tecmo, just known as Koei at this time. Of course, they're still mentioning that Super Soccer is going to be delisted on March 28th. Yeah. I don't think these strategy games are anything you really would want to play. Yeah. This is a collection that almost certainly is just going to remind or teach a new audience just how many bad games were released on the Super NES and the NES. We only really remember the great games, and usually it's Nintendo first-party games. But particularly as somebody who didn't have a Super NES and didn't grow up playing it, Super Mario World is about the only Super NES game that really comes to mind that's worth playing. I imagine there might be a Star Fox game for the Super NES. I know there's also Mario Kart on the Super NES, which might be historically relevant to play. There's Mario Paint for the Super NES that might be somewhat historically relevant, but probably isn't. But then I really struggle to think of anything that was unique and exclusive to the Super NES. A lot of NES games seem to just get slightly new versions on the Super NES. Donkey Kong Country might have been Super NES. Mario RPG might have been on the Super NES originally. I didn't play it on the Super NES though, so I must have played it on something else much later in a re-release form. I don't think there was a Super Mario World 2 on the Super NES. There's also, I think, a heavy emphasis on Game Boy and portable gaming when the Super NES was in its heyday, so Nintendo's desires were split, I think, quite a bit too. Let's see, 27 more classic PC games have joined the Good Old Games preservation program, including Silent Hill 4, which this is a heck of a screenshot to select for the Good Old Games preservation program headline. I'm going to make each game remains playable on modern PCs. This certainly is spooky and grotesque, and definitely evokes a big question as far as what is going to happen with the narrative and the events of Silent Hill 4 and Silent Hill 3 now that the Silent Hill 2 remake has been made. I question what is the guidelines as far as the preservation program for Good Old Games comes down to. Is it just games that they see sell particularly well on Good Old Games, or is it games that they particularly like themselves, or is it a case that they have already done some level of work to make sure that these games run, and as such they already know that they can manipulate the code of these games well enough that they will keep on running? It all feels like this preservation program is leading up to some sort of announcement from Good Old Games to use a virtual machine or a server running like Windows 10 or Windows 7 to stream these games, because that's really what you would need in the longer run to guarantee that these games are going to be playable forever is that you would have some kind of virtual machine that guarantees it will always get updated, much like how the ScumVM virtual machine is pretty much guaranteed through its open source nature to always be updated. Thus, any games that it supports now are pretty much guaranteed to be supported forever. Forever being probably the wrong term. I can't help but wonder also if some of these lists of games being added are just being used as advertisement from good old games. Silent Hill 4 The Room, I think, was one of the least liked Silent Hill games anyways. Some of it clearly is that they've done something to the code and done some kind of tweaks. Yeah. And the preservation program right now really is just improving compatibility with Windows 10 and Windows 11. So it still would probably be nice, though, if Steam had a similar type of program. And it is worth pointing out that things like Fear aren't likely to get a ton of support now that Monolith Studios from Warner Brothers Games has been shut down. Like, those teams, those people are gone. Here, the next Pokemon TCG Pocket set will add shiny Pokemon. Pokemon from the Paldea region will also be introduced. I got one of the legendary style of Pokemon cards that has a Pokemon legendary on it, and it shows this just image of devastation that these godlike or actual god Pokemon are capable of doing. And it does evoke a thought that if you were living in the world of Pokemon, there probably would be some level of terror, in that there are some really, really big Pokemon that have really big attacks that can just devastate the land all around you. And while day to day in the Pokemon cartoon, it seems like they are living very peacefully with their Pokemon, it seems like there is always that danger of that happening. It's almost like the Pokemon fights are to allow the Pokemon to get rid of their aggression, although it's never really implied that the Pokemon generally are aggressive. It's just usually those legendary godlike ones do. And it definitely does evoke the thought in my mind that I doubt the Pokemon Company would ever do this, but you probably could set a Pokemon world into a region that has just been completely devastated by a Pokemon. Just, there are no trees. It is just rocks and rubble everywhere. And it is done then just a post-apocalypse type setting where you have this horrific Pokemon god wreaking havoc, or two Pokemon fighting, wreaking havoc accidentally. Yeah. I guess the only thing Pokemon really hasn't done with its power creep is go into space or go into the distant future or the distant past. So yeah, they're coming out with a new expansion. Shiny Pokemon are Pokemon with different color palettes, which are incredibly rare to find. This mechanic was first introduced in Pokemon Gold and Silver. The new set will also introduce Pokemon and trainers from the Paldea region. Okay. Special EX themed deck missions will also be rolled out soon. These missions see players take on specific decks. That's the single player options. And then the trading systems at some point will be improved. So I don't know how shiny really is going to work in the card game though. Is shiny just going to be, it's the same cards that you already had, but now they are in a even more rare form? And inherently, you already have a dust system that allows you to add effects over the cards you already have by trading in extra cards of that same, extra copies of that same card. So I wonder if you will be able to use the dust to trade in extra cards to get a shiny version of that same card, or if it's going to treat the shiny versions of the cards as separate cards. Because right now it does treat borderless versions of the same cards that have different art as a different version of the card. And if you're trying to be an OCD collector and be free to play, woe is you. That's what I'm trying to do. But yeah, you're gonna just have gaps of really expensive cards that are the borderless cards. And I would imagine if they treat the shinies the same way, the shinies are going to even be more expensive. I think it's somewhere like 1,500 dust to get a borderless card right now, which I think might be 2 gold stars or 3 gold star ratings of rarity. So if a shiny is like 3,000 dust, that would be a lot. In contrast, a basic card is like 50 dust. A advanced stage 2 card tends to be 150 dust. A stage 3 evolved card tends to be, I think, like 500 dust. And you don't get that much dust. You only get dust. No, you don't even use dust to craft those cards. So strike what I just said. You have to use different currencies, which this game has way too many currencies. So you have to have crafting points that are about 50, 100, 500. And then for the borderless, it's like 1,500. And who knows how much it will be for the shinies. I wouldn't be surprised if they say you can't even get shinies with the crafting points and you have to only get them from opening packs. Which, yeah. I see no indication here that the game is actually trying to get much better than it already is, which is not very good. And that it is just trying to create more systems and more currencies to push people to spend real money into it. Meanwhile, they're not even really mentioning and promoting the fact that the gameplay style, when you actually are playing the game, which they don't even really promote that aspect, is a different experience than the standard Pokemon game, which is longer and just more involved. So you are effectively playing something closer to Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links when you play TCG Pocket instead of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Moving on. Pokemon TCG The Glory of Team Rocket has been officially revealed. Team Rocket returns in The Glory of Team Rocket. In this case, they're showing the Japanese versions of the cards. So this is a card version set that's being announced. So eventually it will probably come to TCG Pocket, but right now it's just coming to actual real world paper cardboard back cards. And it's kind of hard to tell for certain that that's the case. It's not really video game related at the moment. Also going to be releasing some Team Rocket merchandise. This might also very well highlight an issue with Pokemon that is going on, that the new season and the new series of Pokemon, as far as not having Ash Ketchum as a protagonist, didn't knock people's socks off. Nobody's talking about those new characters. And there is, I think, a pretty high amount of nostalgia for Pokemon from 20 years ago when it first came out. Which, honestly, it's probably been 30 or 40 years, actually. Yeah, it's probably been about 30 years since Pokemon first came out. But yeah, there's a high level of nostalgia here in that you just have a lot of those first generation Pokemon, although I don't even think that's a first generation Pokemon. Now, what I do find interesting here is you're not seeing Jesse or James in this. You see a Meowth, but this is probably not the Meowth that can talk. And you are seeing Giovanni being shown here. So maybe they're trying to avoid any direct reminders of Ash Ketchum by not having Jesse and James, while still trying to rely heavily on the nostalgia of Jesse and James and Team Rocket. And then Video Games Chronicle has a first play of Watch as We Move House in Inzoi, South Korea's answer to The Sims. Interesting. I almost want to watch that. I haven't heard of this game. Let's see. Let's jump in the middle and just see what this looks like. Well, compared to The Sims 1, there's kind of a major difference here. Guy. Well, it does seem like there's a decent amount of stuff going on here. Saw some clipping there when they went to sit down. They're speaking a gibberish that sounds like it might be somewhat Korean. Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff you would have to put into a Sims game these days to make it feel modern. Just all this 3D modeling and a whole bunch of dialogue choices here. I think though that the problem you would run into in covering or making a new Sims game though is that The Sims is almost certainly a product of its time and doesn't make any sense in modern times as a game. People just don't have that much time and that much desire to effectively play house and dress up doll with a character in a video game way. And if they wanted to do one specific thing, there are several games that would lock into that one specific thing. So if you wanted to just decorate houses, you've already got House Flipper. So if you like that aspect, you can get a better experience probably playing House Flipper, or even using some of the real world house decorating softwares and treating it like a game. If you wanted to manage somebody's life, you probably would want to get more specific than that. So you have like football management games if you want to manage football players, or you have daughter raising simulators if you want to raise daughters and manage a life in that way. Each of those go off into their own little genres, whereas just managing somebody's life who could have any job and really do anything is very generic. If you wanted to manage a certain kind of business, there's all kinds of games around managing hospitals and museums and bars and taverns. And so again, it's each of those concepts are done better in their own niche. And so it is in the mushy middle a Sims game is, as far as I'm not sure who the audience really is that this best serves. And yeah, if you are saying that you wanted to play house, say you were a little girl that wanted to play house or something, The Sims still doesn't make sense, or a Sims game in general doesn't make sense, because you can also play something like Stardew Valley and decorate a house, or Disney Dreamlight Valley, or Animal Crossing, and those would be much more kid friendly. And I imagine there are some young girl Barbie like house management type things, type games. It's probably a very natural process. Let's start going through the news. From Gamatsu, it's probably a very natural process, though, that certain game genres just stop being relevant, and gamers as a community mostly move on. It's better than probably the way movies have locked into certain genres and they just have to stay that way. A horror movie fan from 30 years ago still is probably a horror movie fan watching horror movies that usually are about the same of things they've already seen, particularly if you're just uniquely like a zombie movie fan. There's a lot of zombie movies, but they're all just about the same. But horror movies have stayed around as being somewhat popular amongst their audience for decades. Whereas if zombie movies had gone away after their heyday, and then there had been a large break from zombie movies, and then they had enough time to come back, there could have been something different done there. Which does imply that there is some hope that things like point and click adventures at some point may come back into a large amount of popularity amongst gamers, and that's probably not true. It probably is just going to be the case that they evolve into whole new genres. Vampire Survivor style games might be very close to top-down twin-stick shooter games from 20-30 years ago, but they have a whole new name, they have a whole new level of speed and difficulty that they play at, and only look somewhat similar to their predecessors. Moving on, Devolver Digital and Francis Colombi, have announced a pixel art survival horror RPG called Look Outside for PC now available. Okay. Did see that on the front page here, and yeah, it does look fairly horrific. And yeah, it is also, though, I think worth saying that a lot of Devolver Digital games seem to get coverage just because it's Devolver Digital. They've done a really good job of making their name and their press releases work for them. But I have no idea who Francis Colombi is. And apparently, he's not released anything else on Steam. So, yeah. One of the problems I would say with Devolver Digital, though, is that their games often feel like they are just weird for weirdness sake, or just weird in general. Which I like weird, but I can't help but wonder if that hurts their sales. I'm not sure all of the Gamatsu articles were opened. I think my macro actually did open most of these articles itself, but it seemed to fail at some point and close tabs, perhaps prematurely. Gamatsu has a Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma interview with the producer Hisashi Fuji, setting, building, romance, and more. want to read what looks like a very long interview, check that out on Komatsu. Pokemon trading card game Shiny Revelry expansion launches March 27th, so 5 days from now. It's going to be 110 new cards, which I don't have all the cards right now, and probably won't have all the cards by the end of this 5-day period. Really wish there was a way to catch up without spending money, since I'm not willing to spend money. Wuthering Waves version 2.2 update Tangled Truth in Inverted Tower launches March 27th. It's the origin of the second Dark Tide. Is this even on Steam? It's currently only available via client download and Epic Games Store. It will be available via Steam starting in April 29th. So yeah, you're going to be behind. And since I'm thinking that this is... Well, I was thinking it was an MMO, but it says it's single player with online co-op. So maybe when it comes out on the 29th, it will start with version 1.0 and then add the extra content slower. Although maybe it doesn't really need to do that. The screenshots really aren't showing me much, though. You have just a very little being shown. Dave the Diver X Like a Dragon collaboration DLC Ichiban's Holiday launches April 10th. We had seen this announced. But can I make a YouTube short to show off that crossover? Nope. Not available yet to show off. Monster Hunter Wilds Title Update 1 launches in early April. Showcase is set for March 25th. They're not even giving a name to the title update at the moment, though. So that's really just an announcement for an announcement. RoboQuest for PS5 and PS4 launches May 27th. RoboQuest sounds like a game that would have been fairly old getting re-released, but maybe not. And yeah, it's already on Steam. So let's see what it looks like on Steam. Came out in November of 2023. It's on my wish list already. So yeah. Now, as far as YouTube Shorts go, I need to make a decision. I need to think about this as far as, should I really be making new YouTube Shorts for old games just because it's being released on a new console? Or should I put some hope, probably false hope, into the thought that I've already made a YouTube Short for this game, and thus anybody searching for RoboQuest on YouTube might already see that short. Probably won't, but might. I mean, it's probably, at the moment at least, pretty easy to just say don't make new YouTube Shorts just because it's being released on new consoles. In the long run, it's probably still better to not duplicate it. At some point, YouTube may limit the number of shorts one can have, and it will already be a nightmare if I had to go through them and alphabetically sort and remove any duplicates. Although, what I also could do is just sort by number of views and delete everything that hasn't been seen once, if there was some limitations on videos. Although if YouTube's going to put a limitation on videos, then I'm gonna be in trouble anyways, having 18,000 videos on my channel already. Only about 3,000 of those, I bet, are actually shorts. Twitch is doing that exact same thing at the moment. Twitch never really promised that they were going to keep all the content, and it was never really designed to do that unless you were already monetized with them. So I am getting emails from Twitch that I'm over the limit and they're going to start deleting videos, and I'm like, well, I don't really care. But yeah, that's definitely the reason why I never really embraced Twitch, is that it never could promise that the footage would stay. At some point, perhaps several decades from now, I imagine YouTube's hard drives are going to start failing, and they are going to just start admitting that there are a lot of videos that you can't actually watch anymore because they've been lost. Moving on though, the Red Bell's Lament launches June 5th. This sounds like an otome visual novel, if I was to guess. It's coming out for the Switch on June 5th. Interesting. Usually it is Switch and PC when we hear these announcements. These might be vampire characters with the amount of red I'm seeing here, and I would assume the girl in the middle here is your main protagonist. And you know, it's actually rather strange that when you have these, what I assume are dating stories, which maybe this one isn't really a romance based visual novel, we never see in these dating games the cross-gender options, because even in 2025 the Japanese companies are not willing to admit that homosexuality is really a thing in Japan. So you will all exclusively have all boys, all males as the romance options, and you won't even have any female friends, even if they aren't going to be romance options in most romance visual novels. You might very well have some anime boys that are very feminine in their appearance versus rougher, more masculine appearance, but that's about as far as it goes. And yeah, you barely see romance that goes the other way, and you're, I imagine, even less likely to see romance go in the other way, and that you would be playing as a male protagonist in a romance visual novel. Notice how the image here is much fewer people. But yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen a visual novel where there was one option to date a guy or hang out with a male friend over dating several other female characters. And in the West, they haven't really touched on that in the bisexuality aspect. And I guess that's a phrase I'm forgetting to use here, is that, yeah, I don't know of too many stories where the main protagonist could just be bisexual and want to date potentially males or females or non-binary people. You do definitely have some visual novels though where the protagonist is gay and it's all gay all the time. And that's something I think the West could certainly touch upon more if they were going to try to make those kinds of romance visual novels. They already are going to be called woke no matter what, so they might as well just go even more woke in that aspect. Let's see, Double Dragon Revive pre-order bonus game Double Dragon Dodgeball trailer is available. Which, okay. I guess I kind of want to see what a Double Dragon dodgeball looks like. But yeah, they're going to 2D sprite gameplay, evoking the original Double Dragon games. To promote a completely different 3D Double Dragon game. And see, weirdly, this is basically the exact same thing I said that they should have done to promote Indiana Jones and the Great Circles, that they should have made a sprite-based point-and-click adventure with Indiana Jones. And yet, the fact that I already have heard some negativity around this visuals of the 3D Double Dragon game, this feels just like it's not going to be that much of a sales pitch or that interesting in general. Yeah. Of course, I actually care about the Indiana Jones series of games. I don't really care about Double Dragon, so maybe that's affecting my opinions too. And maybe it's has a little bit to do with the fact that Double Dragon as a fighting game doesn't really connect to a dodgeball mini game, whereas Indiana Jones as in the Great Circle and Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis still feel like the same kind of games. You're still playing as Indiana Jones, you're still doing Indiana Jones type things. I still do wonder if it would be nice if Microsoft made a point-and-click adventure starring Indiana Jones, say at the 1-year anniversary mark of the Great Circle, and put it out as a either free thing or a bonus thing. We see in like the Doom reboot that they had some throwback references to the old pixely original Doom game and level, and in the Wolfenstein reboot you had dream sequences that were throwbacks to the original Wolfenstein game. So there definitely is a way to have old pixely art also show up in a 3D game. You just have to be very creative about it and very cautious about it so that it feels alright and doesn't feel too silly. We talked about the Super NES games being added to Nintendo Switch Online. And today, since I am trying to rush, I am going to lean on the "we talked about it already" trope. A underwater psychological horror game called Dark Mass has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Yeah. There was a movie where it was basically like this. There was a house that had been flooded underwater, and scuba divers went into it, and then the house turned out to also be haunted on top of being flooded, which in the way of doing it in a movie, it felt like they put in way too much effort to have a haunted house story when they literally could have just not flooded the house and it would have been the same story. In video game form, maybe it being flooded would make some more sense. It is an interesting concept, but it has less connection to reality, I think. Really, only a few cities have been flooded, and usually it's done by moving a dam or taking down a dam to intentionally flood the cities. which usually means that the houses, if they're not demolished and destroyed, are already emptied. And in the movie there were 2 people where one of them could get trapped into the underwater house. This might be the pinnacle of the underwater games trope at this point, where, yeah, we've seen a lot of games underwater and on the water in the past 6 to 7 years. Things like Raft and Dave the Diver, which does perhaps maybe hint that we have hit a pinnacle of water tech too, where water levels now are not scaring developers and aren't just 100% awful to the point where you can dismiss any game or any level with water in it as being bad. You can't really say something like Subnautica is bad just because it's underwater nowadays. But it's also kind of unrelatable. I just question how many people actually dive. So, but yeah, there's probably more divers than there are fishers, but just about the same number though, so things have just really changed, and there's definitely more people that dive than pick up swords and fight monsters, and we've got plenty of games like that. A City Tales Medieval Era launches in early access on May 22nd. It's a medieval strategic city builder. Still are getting announcements and press releases for games on fairly frequent basis. Sonokuni launches March 24th for PC and then March 31st for Switch. We had already made a YouTube short around this, so now it has an actual release date. This is kind of a unique visuals in the thumbnail and then completely different visuals in the screenshots. Yeah. Biopunk Japanese mythology inspired landscape. Boy, is that a new phrase. Land Party Adventures has been announced for PC, due out in 2025. So what do you do in a game like that? Are you just connecting computers together? I think that may literally be the extent of it. I once was asked in elementary school to connect all the computers to each other. They apparently had, like, I think it was RJ45 network connections, which would have been fairly new technology, with 2 ports on the back. And they were asking me how to set it all up so that it wouldn't have cords being tripped on it. I don't know why they asked me in particular. I was just a kid and I didn't really know anything, but I know that they thought I knew more than I did about computers, so I just kind of took it as a puzzle and I said, well, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this, not knowing that more than likely setting them up and plugging them all in together would never have worked in the first place. And then after I all set it up and I started to walk away, I don't know if I walked by the library maybe 10-20 minutes later, I noticed that the janitor was unplugging it. So I feel like they were doing some kind of weird psychological experiment, or they learned something else. Now, if it were that they were connecting a token ring network, connecting the back of one computer to another would have made some sense. Or if they were doing a ring layout, even with RJ45 Ethernets, that would have made some sense. But yeah, I don't think that was the case. And honestly, I'm not 100% sure that it was some kind of weird experiment. It may very well have been 2 very uninformed adults. This would have been a very long time ago where computers were very new, and they may have just assumed that you had to connect things together and that every plug needed a cord coming out of it. But I don't know, if it was a test, I guess I didn't prove I was a genius enough for them to do anything about it, or prove that I was stupid enough for them to do anything about it. It may very well have just been busy work. I very possibly was getting on a teacher's nerves. But yeah, these computers are much more modern than the ones I would have been working with, and they only have one Ethernet cord RJ45 port, which is very standard. And to do a LAN party, you would need to plug it into at least a hub, if not a switch. Which gets down to my point. That was a long, pointless story in a stream that's already going way too late, in that I doubt a game like this is going to be particularly fun. Like, I feel like you're going to end up just moving things around quite a bit. And this is probably heavily inspired by somebody who has some real fandom of LAN parties they had in their youth, whereas modern people, modern kids, are never going to have LAN parties and have any need to have a LAN party, because modern games don't allow you to run local servers on the games in the first place. So yeah, here we have what is probably a switch, considering there's a yellowness to this port. I would say it's maybe even a router, in that there's a yellow port instead of being a switch. But yeah, it could just be a managed switch, and the yellow port may be a management port. Could be anything, really. But yeah, this is definitely just not something that you would do with modern games. If you're going to make a LAN party these days, it's probably to play really, really old games, which would probably mean you're running very, very old operating systems. And then you've got some comics here that I guess probably are parody comics, as far as just evoking where a LAN party might happen, and that probably would happen in a comic book store, or could happen in a comic book store. Moving on, the Chill Rooftop Building game High Above has been announced for PC, which I feel like the last time we had a rooftop survival game, that too was labeled as being chill. It feels like that's getting a little specific, a little overly specific to have a rooftop building game. And here's Double Dragon Revive. And we can see what it looks like with its 3D graphics, and yeah, there is anti-enthusiasm just because of this new graphics element. But in fairness, also Double Dragon games are just not getting enthusiasm for anything other than River City Girls, which is part of actually the River City series and not the Double Dragon series, and is a competitor. And even in that case, River City Girls goes in a very different direction from what the other River City games are. Okay. Let's see. What spring sale looks like the last one that was open, so I have a couple of things here. Nah. It opened in the other way, didn't it? Alright. So yeah, the Lenovo, we're going through the Gaming on Linux articles now. Lenovo Legion Go S with SteamOS now on Best Buy for pre-order with the Ryzen Z1 Extreme or Ryzen Z2 Go. Which, yeah. there may actually be a real argument to get this instead of a Steam Deck, just because it's going to be at least a year fresher with hardware. You're not going to get the touchpads if you care about that. You may not get quite the same experience, but if you particularly don't care about desktop mode, that might also, and you don't care about touchpads, that might be fine. The price is going to be the factor here. Let's see. The Z1 Extreme model has 32 gigabytes of RAM for $750, whereas the Z2 Go is the lower spec model at 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of SSD for $550. So you probably don't have an OLED screen either. That would be my guess. So you're probably paying a little too much to not have an OLED screen. Repairability could be a concern if you think you're going to drop it and break it. Let's see. The Windows versions are more expensive. There's basically a $200 difference, or $160, $180 difference between the Go version without Windows versus the one with Windows, or the Extreme version with Windows. Yeah. So yeah, you definitely are paying a premium for Windows there. Which, particularly in this case, if it's the exact same hardware, you could probably get Windows a lot cheaper, if not free, if you look on the dark web well enough. I'll be interested in seeing the reviews. Like, if this gets reviewed particularly well, and it has SteamOS, there is room to bandwagon hop and say, hey, I'm a fan of SteamOS, I'm less of a fan of Valve hardware, and Valve themselves may be very happy with people changing hardware providers but sticking with their software of SteamOS. And with more competition, maybe even the price would go down. I wouldn't hold my breath, but who knows. The light up on the edges here feels unnecessary. It certainly feels a little gimmicky, having lit up edges on the analog sticks and potentially even lit up buttons. I'd hope you could turn that off, because that potentially would be a deal breaker for me. And increasingly we're seeing controllers that have some sort of extra button down below the analog stick, and so controllers I don't think are evolving particularly much, but it does feel like the next step is to add some kind of touch sensitive button below the D-pad also. Depending, it'll be questionable what those buttons actually end up doing. And it's also worth pointing out that, like, these extra buttons that have been added for menu and Steam overlays aren't really doing too much. We've yet to see them allow games to use these extra buttons as extra buttons, or even turbo buttons for in-game play. Let's see. Help, I've discovered Nubby's Number Factory, a Plinko-style roguelike where you can stop the sun exploding. I guess this is a game that he's discovered that he is addicted to. Considering it starts with help. GNOME 48 released with notification stacking, performance improvement, and initial high dynamic range support. GNOME 48 is very interesting as a desktop to continue to improve, but it is not what SteamOS uses. I assume it won't ever be what SteamOS uses, but that is a big assumption. SteamOS uses KDE, and both GNOME and KDE are really collections of mini softwares. But yeah, it would be nice if there was at some point a merger where software that could run in GNOME could also run with KDE in KDE, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think SteamOS is going to be built on GNOME because I don't think Arch Linux particularly has a lot of GNOME based desktop flavors. If you had asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said go with GNOME all the way, but also GNOME 48 is adding a pretty large amount of improvement to its experience. And yeah, you still have also GTK versus GNOME, and so there's also software that is built using GTK instead of GNOME, even though GTK stands for the GNOME Toolkit. I might be thinking of something different here. Yeah, I might be talking on my butt, so let's just move forward. Good Old Game Spring Sale is live with a lot of discounts. I think we had talked about this in the last stream. Since I was letting my macro catch up, we probably will see a lot of repetitive stuff. Yeah, and I think that may be the case here with all of these headlines. So I'm just going to let them show and then move on in an effort to get through the news particularly fast. Yeah, all of this is, I think, relatively old information, although this actually feels like it's new information, so I don't know what order this is actually, and if it's in any order. The preservation program also having games on sale from the preservation program, which that's a useful comparison certainly to have. Let's see. Accept cookies and show. I tried to click on it and it didn't work because my open everything in the new tab button wouldn't allow it. The Entertainment Software Association, that is the ESA, has launched the Accessibility Games Initiative, which I can't help but think that the ESA has had accessible games initiatives in the past. It aims to improve how developers and stores list clear information about the accessibility features in video games, which I guess at some level that might be the beginning of some kind of standardization there. A set of 24 tags with clear criteria of what each tag means. Sample tags include clear text, large and clear subtitles, narrated menus, stick inversion, save anytime, among others. Which save anytime in particular stands out like that should just be mandatory for all games always, is that you could save at any time, to the point where I imagine games should just be like Android apps, in that the programs could be put to sleep at any point, and thus all of the memory and all the way it's programmed is designed to always save its state. Here they have a opinion. Hopefully we will see the likes of Valve expand on accessibility noticed on the Steam store pages, which, yeah, if there's a standard being established and it's actually embraced, then I wouldn't be surprised if there is going to be a case where the Steam website also embraces those same tags. And here you have a reduced motion check mark. But there's definitely something weird about this page. Like, they're trying to be accessible, and they have made a page that, from my visuals, is not the right size at all. And see, scrolling off to the side, I can barely get to this picture. And I turned off my ad blocker to see if that was doing anything. And it doesn't seem like it really is. Yeah. So, yeah, even the page feels weird. And it isn't really saying much. So there's a long list of tags here. Some of these features are going to be fairly infrequent. Chat, speech to text, and text to speech uniquely for game chats with other players. Stereo surround sound. Are these really accessibility features as much as these are just things that probably should be in any game? Narrated menus makes sense. Mono sound makes sense too. Somebody might be deaf in one ear. Separate volume controls should just be mandatory. That was a big problem with the Blackwell Legacy, is that when you launch the game on Steam, the audio is not separate volume controls. In fact, there is no audio setting at all. So to control the voice acting, which needs to be turned up, and turn down the music, you have to use ScumVM just to make it something. Difficulty levels, many games have moved away from that. Save any time, again, probably should be a requirement. Some of these definitely are going to be just like Steam input requirements as far as basic input remapping or full input remapping, whatever the difference is. Here, this is just rearranging button controls. This is specific assignments of actions to specific controls. Keyboard only, mouse only, touch only. So they put some thought into this. None of this screams ridiculous, and some of this would help me. My eyesight is not getting better in old age, and so large text would be appreciated. A big problem though for me is also that I'm looking at TVs 8 feet away, and I need to really just move my chair forward or move the monitor forward, which eventually I plan on doing that whenever I get enough time to get around to doing that. So it seems like a decent initiative, but it also seems like it is probably a lobbying group just trying to get some extra coverage and attention, and it will be fully volunteer based in the same way that you don't really have to get the ESRB ratings even for age ratings on your game. And increasingly, as game companies just are going digital only in their releases, they are going to less and less care about paying the ESA subsidiary ESRB to get their games rated, which is going to mean there's less lobbying money that the ESA has in particular. And yeah, with the state of the United States and the way it looks like it's going, there may just be less need for the ESA anyways, or there might be the exact opposite of that. Just inherently is going to depend on whether there are going to be any government agencies that try to crack down or censor video games for the ESA to fight, or if it's just going to be Congress itself that tries to crack down and censor on video games as a way of distracting people. Which I could see both happening, frankly. It's also worth mentioning, I think, also as far as whether the ESRB and the ESA are going to be relevant, is that they've lost their revenue source from E3. That's not coming back. And Target, as far as what I see as far as headlines, is losing a lot of money right now because it's being boycotted for dropping DEI initiatives. So this isn't now a go anti-woke, go broke campaign that is being mentioned. If Target, which frankly I feel like Target should have gone out of business 20-30 years ago, if they did really just go out of business, then one major supermarket store would be eliminated, and that would leave basically just Walmart to be the only brick and mortar store that sells video games in general. You still would have specialists like GameStop selling video games, and small mom and pop stores might be selling video games. Although I don't know if small mom and pop stores ever got new copies of games to sell. Moving on with the headlines, apparently you can get ready to defend a walking castle in a roguelike action game called Castlebound. Which, yeah, let me scroll down here. Yeah, so much seems like it's changed on Firefox, and I bet what's going to happen is I'm going to reload Firefox, and then everything that seems like it's changed is going to be fixed. The System Shock 2 25th Anniversary Remaster arrives June 26. That sounds like a new story, new headline to me. There have been at least a couple times where I've wondered what was going on with System Shock's remake / remasters. I still think it is a very confused situation where System Shock Remake has gone into development hell, and System Shock 1 and 2 Remaster is slowly getting re-released by Night Dive. Last of Us 2 Remastered devs aim for the best possible experience on handheld gaming devices. Okay. Well, I guess we will say thank you to that and move on. It's not out on PC yet. I wonder what creates this, where this game only supports the Japanese interface and voice for customers in Japan. I could see why Japanese music and voice acting rights would prevent the Japanese voice acting and the Japanese music from coming to the rest of the world. But I don't know why it would go the other direction. Because then you're basically following just United States licensing and copyright laws, or the West's licensing and copyright laws, which is very similar to the United States laws. The only thing I could guess is maybe it was just laziness on the release on PlayStation, that the version released in Japan on PlayStation was Japanese interface and Japanese voice acting only, and that is what they're working on for the Japanese version of the PC release. You do have to wonder, for all the talk around Last of Us, it must just not be much of this where you're actually shooting these mushroom monsters or hiding or fighting them, because that just really never gets talked about at all. And maybe that is also just partially because the story is so much more impactful. But yeah, it does just kind of feel like if you just wanted this experience, where it's a horror game and you're fighting mushroom-headed zombies, I just don't think you can get that in Last of Us 2 in particular. Yeah. I assume this is rated for mature, so I will try to make a YouTube short on this and be disallowed. I was never able to fix that. The requirement of clicking through an age gate or having a cookie set just does not work with OBS as far as I can tell. I could never figure out a way to do it. Maybe at some point there might be some update to OBS and its browser view to open a web page that would allow something like that. You know what? I probably should just ask them to have a function where you could create a cookie in the browser view. That would actually probably be doable. Moving on, the Humble Heroines bundle returns with some great games for Women's History Month. Man, I'm not even reading the headline right. Which, okay. The Humble Bundle these days. Let's just look at it. If you let's go and consent to that. If you pay at least $12, you would get this game, which I don't know if Fury is really a good example of a strong female character. She's a character who happens to be female, but being one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, she's not particularly feminine. Or, I mean, you could easily have said she was actually genetically a male and just presents as a female, and it would be the exact same character. All the horsemen of the apocalypse are really just rage monsters fighting characters. And so, yeah. And you could probably say the same with the female protagonist in Control. You could easily have replaced her with a male character and the story would have been the same. And yeah, I guess it probably says something. Is this an actual game? Apparently it is. A couple of these I don't recognize. Let's see if we can maybe find them on Steam. It is a weird thing that by default the protagonists in a video game are male, and it's perhaps less of a weird thing that you would want that the characters themselves are very little in personality. So yeah, there's definitely like more backstory to somebody like Batman than there is this main protagonist. This story I think actually does probably have a lot of characterization and backstory to it. But yeah. To get a Steam key though, I think you have to pay at least $5. I don't think you can even pay less than $5 or more nowadays to get Steam keys. And to get all 7 of these games would be to pay $12, which is not a terrible deal, particularly if you wanted these games and you didn't already own any of them, which increasingly Humble Bundles run into that problem where you probably do own them all. Every time I click on something here, it's just opening the same page again. Again, my plugin here is just not working right. So like this, $5 for these 3 games would be a better deal for me in particular, because then it would be just these games. But yeah, to look at the Humble Bundle feels like it's going to be kind of useless to me in that the redeem on Steam aspect does not link to a Steam page. So what I'd have to do is find a way to highlight the text, which notice that not all the text is particularly highlightable, and then search it. Let's see. Yeah, I'd have to be able to highlight the text alone, then right click, then I can do Steam context menu and search all of this. But if I was to search Steam for this, it searched that massive amount of text and found nothing. So then I would have to how to get my chat decorum in that search. Yeah, everything is just broken. Everything is really broken today. And see, this is a game that came out July 28th in 2023 and looks fine. It's overwhelmingly positive. I can put it on my wish list, but that's about all I can do, and it's not worth spending any more time trying to add the other 2 games to my wish list through that process, which inherently highlights that it's not really worth my time to look at Humble Bundles. But certainly we once again have to the realms of possibility of Earth Defense Force games this time. Of course, they want $25 now, so you really would have to want to jump heavily into Earth Defense Force. This is more anime than I was expecting. Bullet Girls marketing from the Earth Defense Force series. Yeah. And the problem with the Earth Defense Force series is that all those games are pretty bad quality. I used to be a real fan of the Humble Bundles, in that you could give things to actual charities, give all the money to charity. You couldn't write it off on your taxes as an actual donation because you're receiving something for the donation, but you could feel good about it. And typically the prices did seem pretty low, and you would get some hidden gems usually. But after a year or 2 of getting Humble Bundles, and with Humble Bundle changing how they do things quite a bit, it just doesn't feel like they can find any more hidden gems that I don't already own, and then it's just not really worth paying attention to it at this point. I definitely haven't heard too many people talking about Humble Bundles these days either. Moving on to GameDeveloper.com. You need to define what it means to be safe as players around the world. A code of ethics in gaming. I assume this is an opinion piece. Um, which inherently, just from the headline and knowing GameDeveloper.com, I imagine this is an opinion piece that is just promoting extremely restrictive code of ethics on players and morals clauses, which, I mean, that's not any real different than a code of ethics for probably for in and outside of gaming. And those ideas just don't work because, first of all, they are censorship. You're not going to get around that. It is just straight up censorship, saying somebody can't say something or do something that the game otherwise would allow. And there's just too many different communities and too much variety in what's acceptable. What I expect is acceptable to be done or said while playing the Hello Kitty game that just came out is completely different to the amount of activity and the type of activity I would expect in, say, a Call of Duty matchup. Call of Duty rated him for mature game. I'm not going to really complain if somebody lets go of the FUCK word. And yeah, maybe the other F word is to a point where Call of Duty would say no to that. But yeah, there are definitely roleplay games where certain words would be acceptable, even really extreme words. And there are just definitely certain groups of players who are more than welcoming and accepting of that stuff. And yeah, you just can't really police people's minds and what they want to do to entertain themselves. If we go down this route of this kinds of censorship of players, it's really just a backdoor way of going down the route to eventually censor the creators of the games and all art overall. And if you believe in free speech, then you must fight to protect disgusting speech that you don't agree with. Now, if you're going to a tournament, are there reasonable rules that you going to an esports tournament can expect that you aren't going to get stabbed the night before as a way of preventing you from competing? Yeah, I think the rules of reality in society still should apply. That if something is illegal being done to you physically, that is reasonable. But once you're in a virtual reality, you're agreeing to play pretend. So if you get stabbed in a video game, that has never been assault. It should never be assault. In the same way, if somebody said something to your character in a game, if an NPC said something to your NPC character you're controlling in a game, you shouldn't take that as something being said directly to the player. Although those lines get blurred pretty quickly. I guess I could go into deeper elements here, but I'm already super late, so let's just move on. If you watch enough of my footage, you'll know me to be a pretty close to free speech absolutionist in most cases. GDC, I guess, happened with Belertro winning Game of the Year. Do we have a list of any other winners? Yes, we do. Does feel like Black Myth Wukong probably has gotten more awards than it normally would have gotten had there been more competition. And because of the lack of competition, also Metaphor ReFantazio is getting more awards than it would have usually gotten, as it is definitely a case where the game awards in the West tend to ignore games developed by Eastern companies that won't send people to accept their awards. And then they're giving a Pioneer Award to Lucas Pope and a Lifetime Achievement Award to Sam Lake. Which, okay. Yeah. every time I see an awards like this, I definitely would prefer that these were People's Choice Awards instead of being handed out by some committee of unknown people. And I would like to see more awards given out for more games, more variety of games, and just more awards in general. It's kind of ridiculous to say Blair chose the Game of the Year when plenty of people didn't play Blairtro, and for many people, Black Myth Wukong should have been Game of the Year. Or Helldivers should have been Game of the Year, which wasn't even mentioned. Nintendo, Microsoft, EA, basically those are the people who sit on the board of the ESA, have united to make accessibility messaging a priority. They are decades behind too, and that certainly highlights where a lobbying group that is really just trying to protect an industry is going to be motivated to maintain the status quo or make it even easier for game developers in this example to do less. So they must be feeling fairly high amounts of pressure from some other group to include accessibility information before the government mandates it, which at some level, I know the United States is not really moving in this direction, but a Department of Accessibility wouldn't be the craziest thing ever, where all forms of art get assigned labels or can submit their art for labeling with accessibility tags. Certain books that are on tape, although I think you can get a reader to read any book to you if you're blind. But yeah, books that have large print versions, you would probably make it not its own separate department. You'd probably just make it a division of the Library of Congress, really. Movies that have subtitles and things like that. FCC, FTC could be involved in projects like that to force subtitles in everything that is on over-the-air broadcasts, and they already really do that, but currently at the moment the FTC is kind of letting over-the-air broadcasts die in the sense that they are letting the digital version of the signal ATSC1 lower its power in favor of the newer ATSC3 standard, which can have more encryption built into it, which potentially is going to force the small percentage of people who watch over-the-air TVs to get a new decoder box or buy a new TV. And the encryption in particular over there is going to be used to try and sell movies and TV things on demand with two-way communication over the air. So you may see a significant lowering of quality of over-the-air TV, which is already at rock bottom as far as the quality to begin with. Moving on, I'm rambling. How Civ 7's powerful narrative system helps player experience both unique parts of history. Helps experience unique parts of history, not both. I saw the both down here and added it up here. Using player agency to engage with history, both real and fictitious, is the subheadline. This again is pretty much just an advertisement piece. It might be useful if you actually were a game developer, but increasingly, I just don't feel like game developers actually go to gamedeveloper.com to read their articles. They might list their resumes on gamedeveloper.com. I'm not even sure if that's the best place to list your resume as a game developer, or if you would just be using something like LinkedIn that's more universal. And I imagine most game developers get jobs by knowing somebody or being hired out of college. But yeah, when I watch YouTube programmers and game developers, they don't talk about articles they've read. They talk about game jams they've gone to and people they've met who have worked on other projects or inspirations of other games that have been released that they've looked at. So, yeah. It would be kind of weird if GameDeveloper.com really was an authority as far as, hey, all game developers read this trade magazine equivalent online to get ideas of how games are being made. It's not really in-depth enough, even though this is a fairly long article by modern standards. You really need a 2 to 3 hour PowerPoint presentation to really understand what a game developer is doing if they're going to say something like that. And usually that's what happens at like game jams, is that you have people giving presentations like that maybe aren't 3 hours, but they are much longer than a single page on a web page. Quote, "It's okay to make a small game," end quote. Astrobot developer Nicholas Doucette says tiny ideas contain huge potential. Quote, "As game designers, we always think that more is better, but it's not the case." That is one thing with the Blackwell Legacy that I kind of do feel like I agree with, is that the idea of having a smaller point-and-click adventure does have a level of appeal. But I also have to admit that one of my major criticisms with the Blackwell Legacy is that it was too short and too small. And frankly, Astrobot is dozens of times larger than the Blackwell Legacy, so small is a relative term, really. And it's probably easier still to measure games based on the hours. And so you targeting a 10 to 15 hour game seems acceptable. Making a 1 to 5 hour game is still likely to be unacceptable to most. And making a 200 hour game is only going to appeal to your hardcore fandom. This is also a weird sentiment to be pointed out by the Astrobot developer, considering how the Astrobot tech demos before the most recent Astrobot games were really small, and the current Astrobot game is just constantly getting expanded with more content, so it's not small either. So yeah, he's not perhaps making the best example himself. Alright, now I'm going to try and go through all the games on Steam, and despite my best efforts, I still talk too much, and this is going to be an over 3 hour stream, putting me late into the night or early in the morning. Take your pick. And the only thing I can say is it's not my fault that the Firefox browser is acting wonky. It's the one thing I'm not going to take the blame for. It's weird, we don't see too many games like that. I don't see too many games like this either, but I'm not really interested in showing it off. Although inherently, because it's asking me do I want to leave, it is giving me just enough pause to make me want to rethink my decisions. And so you might very well see me click stay on page and then rethink it. Population quiz. Is that even useful information to memorize the population of countries, since the population is always going to be changing? I almost put this on the fault list just based on this thumbnail. I need to be a little bit more critical than that, I'd say. Audio race. Audio games full of adrenaline. Might be worth checking out. I know there was a much older audio only game that I think was racing. based. Pong 2 is kind of ridiculous. Sushi conveyor belt doesn't look interesting enough. I'm trying to be fairly critical on anything that is just a simulator game. Light bearers, probably nothing. Yeah. I did have a thought, this looks terrible, that what I would do, as the macro is just taking forever. One of the reasons why it was taking forever is that when it is broken, it waits 30 seconds to try to find the elements on the page, but if it's on the wrong page, those elements will never be there. So for every little element, it was just adding extra 30 seconds to the processing. Part of fixing that and fixing the code in general is going to be trying to make more of it functionalized, so it's the same code being done over and over again, which is hard to do because is this something is this really a game? I question whether it is or not. Let's give it a try. But yeah, UI Vision actually doesn't support functions. What it lets you do, though, is run another macro with variables being in the same scope as the first macro. So you can have a top level macro run secondary macros, and then the top level macro you can set variables and manipulate the variables later in the second tier. So you can pass things like functions, pass variables like passing a variable to a function. But the functions don't really have a return by default, so you would at best just set a variable inside that second tier of macro and then check that variable when you get back to the top level of the macro, and it still is just going to be fairly complicated, and the whole interface itself is something that's not very smooth, so it takes up way too much visual space and is really designed to do very minimalistic things, and I'm pushing it to its limit, trying to make macros to open all the news sites and all the games that have come out on Steam. Yeah. And I'm hoping to just be able to burn through all these games before having to run off and go to the bathroom again. Increasingly, that is also happening, both in pre-recorded footage and in the live streams. I'm taking multiple bathroom breaks, I'm drinking too much water, but you really can't convince me to not drink water, since A, it's probably healthy, and B, I need it to keep my throat from closing up and drying out. I guess at a certain level, is this in English? Yeah. At a certain level, I am just pushing the extents of the human throat to its level. And yeah, that's why on radio shows, podcasts, they have 2 or 3 people talking at the same time, or not at the exact same time, but talking to each other and giving each other mini breaks to say different things. Interesting. I've never seen a game that said 4K 120 frames per second just in the advertisement of the game. It looks like a bullet hell mess otherwise. Yeah. This looks like an old school Metroid game. New Kid on the Block. And see, this might actually be an old game, so. But yeah, when there's an old game like that, I am fully in assuming that I need somebody to review the game and say, actually, this game is from an older time. Steam is not particularly accurate as far as when a game was originally made. So, yeah, I definitely found that out, that the 2012 release date of the Blackwell Legacy is actually 6 years after when it first came out, which was in 2006. But yeah, well, that clears up the real world timeline of the release of the game. The in-game timeline of events of the Blackwell Legacy is really messed up. It's not thought out very well at all, because you're not spoiling too much here to say this. You are adopted by your aunt in the Blackwell Legacy at the age of 5, and then seemingly the aunt goes into a coma within at most months of adopting you at the age of 5, and then at some point she starts to come out of the coma, but when she comes out of the coma she's just in this major amount of pain. There was a game that looked almost exactly like this many years ago. So yeah, she's in a lot of pain and she's just completely crazy when she comes out of the coma later, and then she just stays in that coma for 20 to 25 years. I think 25 years. So you are a full-grown woman. The character you play as is weirdly called Rose Angelina, when really it should just be Rosa. Yeah, have I resolved to not make YouTube shorts around these kinds of games? Yeah, I guess it's a matter of just screenshots. If the screenshots look good and don't look like they're not family friendly, I might as well make a YouTube short around it. I'm not going to just dismiss it like I will AI Gallery, for instance. Which, yeah, I don't know if there's really even any AI in this, or if those are just pictures being labeled as AI. Possibly stolen pictures if it was going down that way. Of course, I have no evidence of that. I'm just baselessly speculating. So yeah, the timeline is just crazy, because then if your aunt adopts you, because there's nobody else to really adopt you as far as the story says, and then she goes into a coma within months and you're 5 years old, then there really needed to be some backstory said that she was raised in an orphanage or raised by somebody else, and they never mention any of that in the first game. Maybe they clean up the story and maybe those are mysteries revealed later, and inherently I do wonder if the Blackwell series of games turns out to be decent when you play all 5 of the games. But if somebody just played the first one and said, nah, there's not enough here, or it doesn't explain enough, or it doesn't give enough backstory to the main protagonist at the very least, those kinds of players are not going to ever know the backstory, which I could see why people would agree with that. Here we have Atelier Yumiya, Alchemist of Memories in the Envisioned Land, is mixed reviewed, not getting the success so far that the previous Atelier series had. There's really a good game buried in here somewhere. Coming from Sophie DX as my last game, there's a lot more that feels like they've caught on to trends in the last few years. It's kind of a Breath of the Wild Genshin-ish in some ways. All the negative things listed in other reviews are just true. The graphics are strangely blurry, no graphic setting fixes that it's like you should be wearing glasses. The game also only takes 2% of your GPU, uses 40% of your CPU, but somehow freezes and drops frames, especially around the lighthouse. So it sounds like it's an optimization problem. Basically isn't using my GPU at all. It's almost entirely CPU dependent. The performance varies wildly. Sometimes I'm getting 100 plus frames per second. Sometimes I'm getting sub 20 frames per second. Yep. So yeah, we're still seeing a transition phase for Japanese game developers, just not really knowing how to program for computers, and very possibly there being only one type of computer that they're testing their programming on in their Japanese offices. Which, yeah, I would highly say that for big companies like Koei Tecmo, for instance, that they should order in every brand of gaming pre-built computer they can get their hands on and do testing with that. At the very least, they should have some test builds for different brands of graphics cards and video cards. But also, it does feel like while we've convinced a lot of Japanese companies to bring games to Steam and PC, we haven't convinced them to actually care about the quality of the games on day one and launch. Yeah. And that's going to be a problem in the long run until they do get convinced to care about PC launches. So the best thing that could possibly happen here is that the Japanese reviews, which is what I imagine Koei Tecmo is going to care about more, would turn out to be negative. So if we were to, can't seemingly get the chart up yet because it's too new. If we were to say negative reviews only, and then remove my language, and then go with that would be 204 negative reviews amongst all languages versus 374 positive reviews. And as we scroll down, it definitely seems like there is a high number of written in Japanese. Well, I shouldn't point to the one that's obviously written in Korean. Negative reviews. Yeah. I'd assume these are all Japanese and not Chinese. Except for that one. That one's in Korean. Or at least it looks Korean to me. What language does it support? That would help also bring it down. As far as, yeah, Chinese, Korean, Japanese. And noticeably, you don't get too many French, German, Spanish, or Russian reviews. So hopefully Koei Tecmo will learn its lesson and not release the next Atelier game in such a poor state. Anyways, I need to move on. But then we have Tamsoft as the developer and Bandai Namco here, also having mixed reviews. with Bleach Rebirth of Souls, which you would think they would put more effort into things like that. Game crashes. Can't play online with friends. Have to launch the game in administrative mode. Gameplay is great, but port is pretty bad. We'll update review once it's fixed. Game crashes, no audio when you launch the game, so you have to keep restarting. Screen will randomly freeze, but you can still hear the game running in the background. Inconsistent and buggy frame per second. No crossplay with consoles. Performance issues for users with high-end specs. So again, it's just what I just said. We have not convinced the Japanese developers to care about their day one launch of the PC versions of games like this, of their games in general. Well, this is quite a name. Kuntiwik Tucked a Meek Ma Adventure? I have no idea what even language that is. There's been a lot of games that have been announced where it's siblings going on an adventure together, and quite a lot of them disappear and never show up and come out. Yeah, come to think of it, yeah, I'm thinking of at least one or two that were announced over the past few years and either came out and I totally missed them, or I never came out. A big thing certainly though is that they also do sometimes come out and then they just aren't particularly impressive. Frog Management Sim. It's a weird one, so I'll give it a chance. There is kind of an obvious reason why you wouldn't want a story with siblings though, because then you eliminate the possibility of, well, you usually eliminate the possibility of any kind of romantic entanglement when it's two siblings playing together. So yeah, it's just as easy to change siblings into being not related so that you can have hints at a romance and people can have their own headcanon. I would lean towards assuming that I've missed some games here, but yeah, I'm not going to do anything to correct it today or this late in the morning. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.